Good morning, everyone. I will wait a few moments, make sure we're all connected. All right, it looks to me like we have everyone, at least who's here, connected in. So I'll go ahead and get started with our little introduction this morning. Good morning. It is 9:02 a.m. on September 26, 2023. I'm Hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is phase 3 of the hearing and the court reference proceeding in the case of City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar, Monterey County Superior Court case number 20CV001387. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom web conference and is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. The audio and video are being recorded, and we will post those files to the AHO FTP site. And the YouTube recording is also available on the AHO YouTube webpage. As usual, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties trying to communicate during the hearing day today, please send an email to the AHO at adminhrgoffice@waterboards.ca.gov. My team will be monitoring that inbox and will let me know. Assisting me today are several staff of the Administrative Hearings Office, Nicole Mullen, Skylar Anderson, and Kyle Woldridge, as well as Regina Graziano with the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance. I think I'm going to do the same as I have and just carry over the appearances we had from our hearing days about a week and a half ago. But I will look to the room other than our witnesses. Is there anyone in the room today who has not previously had a chance to introduce themselves during this phase 3 of the proceeding? All right, I think with that, we can orient ourselves to the agenda for the day and our next steps. One request I had made was asking all of you to confer amongst yourselves about an additional hearing day for us to address procedural issues. I think we'll have a busy day today, so it seemed like a good idea to have a hearing day out a bit so that we can deal with the admission of evidence and consideration of any objections to that evidence at that time. It sounds like I received an email, or our office received an email proposing October 12th as that additional day. That works from the AHO end, and I just wanted to look to the room to confirm that October 12th is an appropriate day for us to schedule as our procedural hearing day. The idea would be we'd address evidentiary issues on that day, and we wouldn't necessarily need the participation of the expert witnesses. And we would meet and deal with the admission of evidence of the exhibits on that day. So I'm looking to the room. If you have any objection to October 12th, please feel free to unmute yourself and say something.
I think we're all good to go on the 12th. We had reserved, we wanted to check with one last person, so I'll take ownership of that, but we're good to go. So thank you for the time.
Wonderful. Wonderful. October 12th, let's start at 9 a.m. I sure hope we don't go all day, but let's block up the schedule and keep it reserved just in case we need it. And we will start at 9 o'clock and move through that as quickly and efficiently as possible. Thank you. And thank you for coordinating on that date. With that, as I recall where we left off, and I'll look to the room to see if there are any other procedural issues we need to address before we get started. But I think where I left off is we had just completed the cross-examination of Dr. Trudell by Mr. Osias, and we were turning to the next witnesses, which I'm actually not sure if it was Dr. Kincaid or Ms. Nelson. I have those as both remaining for cross-examination. Maybe I will look to you, Mr. Osias. Does this fit your understanding of where we left things?
Yes.
Great, good. It was not that long ago, but it seems a little distant. Is there anything else we should address before we, well, first, maybe Mr. Osias, will you who do you plan on cross-examining next?
So my colleagues will handle cross-examination today.
Oh, lovely.
Mr. Betts
For you,
and
I mean.
Mr. Moore.
Okay.
Mr. Betts with Dr. Kincaid and Mr. Moore with Ms. Nelson. I defer to them as to which sequence.
Thank you, David. I'll jump in and take it from here. And thank you very much, Ms. Kunze. And you are correct on where we left off. And we respectfully request if we could start with Dr. Kincaid for some questions. And then as Mr. Osias indicated, we will then proceed with Ms. Nelson.
All right. I will then, with that orientation, I'll look to the room. Is there anything else we should address procedurally before we jump into the cross-examination of Dr. Kincaid?
I think there's a response date needed perhaps on the objection that was filed on Friday at your request.
And thank you for filing that objection. We did receive it. Just thank you for bringing that up. We do have it. I guess I will look to if we're going to meet again on October 12th, and the other parties want to submit something in writing, and for me to have a chance to look at it. Let me see. Let me look at my calendar. I suppose I'd ask for a response by October 4th. If that makes sense, that gives me plenty of time to take a look. So are there any comments or suggestions with respect to that?
Good morning, Skip Spaulding.
morning.
Yeah, that's fine with the city of Marina.
Great. Then I will set October 4th, and I will submit. My office will issue another amended notice of hearing to add the October 12th date, and then I'll also include this deadline. So we have it all in writing. Is there anything else to address? All right, with that, I will look to, I think we're ready for cross-examination of Dr. Kincaid. Dr. Kincaid, I see you here on my Zoom screen. Good morning. I think if you wouldn't mind going off mute, I will just ask you whether you recall.
Good morning.
Good morning. Whether you recall taking the oath when we met about a week and a half ago in these earlier hearings. Thank you. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Betts, to begin your cross-examination.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kunze. And good morning, Dr. Kincaid.
Good morning.
How's it going today?
Good. Good. Thank you.
I want to start with some background questions. You're aware of the prior project called the Regional Desalination Project, correct?
The prior project, no, I'm sorry. Some more information, perhaps.
Really? You sat through phase one when we talked about the RDP, the Regional Desalination Project. It's your testimony, you don't recall that?
The exact phrase RDP, I'm not familiar with that. I am familiar with the project that the Marina Point Water Supply Plan project from when I first became involved with it in 2015 until present.
What about the project that the Marina Coast Water District, CalAm, and the County of Monterey were going to be a part of near the CMEX site? Are you aware of anything about that?
Only vaguely, just in like passing conversations.
Well, you sat through phase one of the hearing where your client put on testimony about that project. There's questions about that project. Is it really your testimony? You don't know what I'm talking about?
No, it's not my testimony. I don't know what you're talking about. It's my testimony that I understand it in passing, and that I wasn't directly involved with the testimony that took place about that project.
What do you know about that project?
I only know that there was some effort made to engage in desalination for Marina Coast Water District at some point in the past, and that didn't move forward.
And where was that project to be located, if you know? Where were the wells to be located?
As my understanding, that those project wells were located near the MCWD office, so basically directly west of the current MCWD wells.
And from where was that project going to draw water?
I don't know.
Did anyone ever tell you that that project would cause any harm whatsoever to Marina Coast wells?
No, we never discussed that, other than just that they had proposed doing that and that it didn't move forward.
Hey, but that's not my question. My question, did anyone at any point in time tell you that project located where you just said was going to cause any form of harm similar to the simulated harm you've testified about recently?
No,
Any type of seawater intrusion?
no.
And you understand Marina Coast Water District was supposed to be part of that project, correct?
Again, it was my understanding that Marina Coast Water District was engaged in that, but it didn't move forward.
And do you know of any potential harm that project could have caused from any source whatsoever?
No, because I didn't look in any way other than just talking about it in passing.
And why wouldn't you have looked at that in any way? If it was a prior project, it was probably one of the biggest projects to happen on the peninsula in the last 30, 40, 50 years. Why not ask any question or do any research about that project? And maybe it sheds light on your analysis here.
I don't believe it would shed light on my analysis here. I was asked from the very beginning to come in and comment on the modeling that was done for this project, and that's what I've done.
How do you know it wouldn't shed any light if, according to you, you didn't look at it?
Because it wasn't referenced in any of the modeling documents that I read that were prepared to support the work that was done on this project.
And no one has told you from the beginning of time till today that that RDP project that you just identified would cause any form of simulated harm similar to what you're projecting about the current project, correct?
Other than in passing, there has been no discussions with me about that project in any way. So no discussions of harm.
Are you aware that near Marina Coast Water District's headquarters, they have a desalination, or it's a no longer operating desalination plant?
I'm not aware of that.
You've never seen it?
I've never seen it.
You ever been to Marina Coast headquarters?
I have not been to Marina Coast headquarters.
Are you aware of any plans by the Marina Coast Water District to re-engage that desalination plant?
I'm not aware of any plans to re-engage that desalination plant.
And do you have any information whatsoever that Marina Coast desalination plant, to which I'm referring, would cause any form of harm similar to what you're hypothesizing this project may cause?
I have not looked at that project at all. And other than in passing, I did not even know of its existence.
What about in passing? How did you learn of its existence?
Because in our discussions, it was mentioned that there was the wells that you're referring to were abandoned, and that they were previously part of a project that was proposed to perform desalination, and that it didn't move forward.
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. I thought when I first asked you if you knew anything about Marina Coast Water District's plant, you said you knew nothing, but now you do know something about it being abandoned?
No, I said the wells, that there were wells that were raised in testimony, in the previous testimony, that are located near the beach and were owned by MCWD. So in discussion of about those wells, it was discussed in passing that they are abandoned wells, that they were previously part of a project that researched the possibility of desalination, and that project did not move forward.
Has anyone told you from any source whatsoever that those wells could cause any form of harm similar to the harm you're hypothesizing about in this phase 3?
No.
Seawater intrusion? Anything
No.
about? Nothing whatsoever?
No.
Let me ask you, can you identify any beneficial use for the current project whatsoever, or are you just hired to identify potential problems?
Objection being
No.
is beneficial.
I'm sorry.
I think the objection is fair, but maybe Dr. Kincaid, I'll ask it this way. What was, when you were asked to conduct your work for this proceeding, what was the scope of what you were asked to do?
Well, at the beginning, I was asked to evaluate the modeling that had been done by CalAM's experts and interpret what those modeling results were for my clients. So it was largely an interpretation effort. Then as we moved into this new phase of work, my job or my scope was to develop a model to try to, as best as possible, understand the groundwater flow system and what, if any, impacts would be caused by the proposed project to the groundwater flow system.
And can you oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll give it back to you, Mr. Betts. I just had a follow-up for clarification, Dr. Kincaid. When you said the new phase of this, I don't know if you said proceeding, but new phase, are you referring to phase 2 of this proceeding?
I apologize, I'm a bit lost in the phase numbers at this point.
Right.
But in by new phase, I mean the 2023 effort in which we were tasked with independently developing models to provide a comparison of interpretations to the AHO.
Thank you. That clarifies for me. Back to you, Mr. Betts. Thank you.
Thank you. And when you were tasked to analyze impacts, did you identify any positive impacts that the project will have?
The obvious positive impact would be the water that it produces, and then the sale of that water for its purpose. So that would be the beneficial use.
Okay, and what do you mean selling the water for its beneficial use? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, CalAM will provide water and sell that water. So like any purveyor of a product, that will be a beneficial use to the purveyors.
Which purveyors?
As I understand it, CalAM will be the purveyor or the proprietor selling the water.
Selling the water to whom, or to which, or to what?
That I do not know.
And similarly, in analyzing the CalAM models, can you identify anything that the CalAM experts did correct?
Well, you want to walk through everything at this point. So I would start with the conceptualization. So I believe that generally speaking, we share conceptualizations. And so to the extent that I would understand that to be correct, then I would say that the conceptualization of the hydrostratigraphy, at least we're consistent with respect to that. We differ in our interpretation of the extent and thickness of the primarily the 400-foot aquitard. So
I'm sorry, I'm not asking where you differ. I'm asking what they did that you agree with was correct.
Well, I'm sorry, but if that was nearly a year and a half worth of modeling work overall, so I'm going to have to go through that step by step. So again,
okay,
we're going to start with the hydrostratigraphy. I am trying to answer your question. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to go through every step of the construction of the groundwater and the fate and transport model, and identify you where I think that what they did was correct and where I think what they did was incorrect.
I'm sorry,
So,
I apologize to interrupt. That's not my question of what they got incorrect. My question solely, and you have counsel, people may ask you that. My question is solely about what they did that was correct. I know you want to talk about incorrect, and we have testimony on that.
that's fine. I'm just trying to tell you that it's an 18-month effort. And so my answer is going to be lengthy. And so when I get to the points that are incorrect, I'll just stop, and then I'll skip to the next one that I think is correct.
Dr. Kincaid, I understand your point, and Mr. Betts, I understand where we're going. This may be a useful exercise. I mean, it's quite interesting. But what I will say, Mr. Betts, is I'm going to allow Dr. Kincaid in his response. I think it'd be very difficult, at least from my perspective, to respond without having caveats to say, I agree with this portion with the exception of this particular issue. So I am going to allow Dr. Kincaid in his response to identify potentially areas in which he disagrees, so that he can identify the areas in which he has agreement. If you don't want to go through that exercise, that's up to you, Mr. Betts, but I just wanted to let you know that I think that's a fair part of Dr. Kincaid's testimony to clarify his response to your question. But I'll give it back to you, as to how you want to proceed and whether we want to go through this.
Yeah, I will pass. I mean, I think the point is if he's, in my humble opinion, so biased that it has to be both sides, I that answer tells me what I needed to know. I mean, I was curious if he was just able to identify anything positive or anything we got right without caveats. If he can't, that instructs me of where we need to go. So no, I don't need to know everything he disagrees with as well.
All right, let's move on. Thank you, Mr. Betts.
If we could look at exhibit 164, that's your testimony for phase 3. And may I respectfully go to page 12, lines 26 through 28, please. And thank you, that's perfect. I have a question about the sentences from lines 26 through 28. And your first sentence says the data used to generate the maps depicted on slides 50 and 51 were incorrect at 3 of the project area monitoring wells. Do you see that, sir?
Yes.
What data was incorrect?
Well, I would like to read the rest of that paragraph if you could.
We can, but if you could answer my question after, it'd be greatly appreciated. The rest,
I will, but as soon as I can read the context of the rest of the paragraph that's not shown.
sure. It says, we identified the issue prior to my testimony and corrected the data files, but unfortunately the correction did not get passed down to the map.
Okay, and
Can we scroll
So-
down to the next page?
Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
so the issue at hand was that the wells that in particular I believe there were 3 project wells that on initial transmission from EKI, it was discovered that the reference point elevations were incorrect. And so the elevations were incorrect as originally transmitted. So EKI transmitted a corrected version either the same day or the next day. And I'd already generated all the maps and we went back and corrected it, but a piece of that didn't get carried all the way down to the map. And then ultimately that problem was corrected, and I believe it's MCWD 15, I think it is, the exhibit that includes all of the data that was delivered. So those data points were then corrected, and then this testimony speaks to the fact that we identified that problem, described what happened, and then made those corrections.
The incorrect data, was that testimony that you had for phase 2 that you submitted written testimony for?
As I said, I think that the map was, part of the map was corrected and part of the map wasn't corrected. And that's because of the timing. And then when this came down, the question specifically was, actually by that time, the whole thing had been corrected. But the question was, is it correct? And we identified that there was a problem, and then we rectified that problem.
I'm sorry, I have a different question. In your phase 2 written testimony, did it have incorrect testimony based on this mistake that you've identified?
It did not have incorrect testimony because I didn't speak directly to the 3 points that are at issue. And the difference in the values of those 3 points didn't change the interpretation or my testimony. But those values were, those values were incorrect in their original use, and that was then corrected. But so nothing changed about my testimony, but the map itself is now corrected.
And I'm sorry, when I say your testimony, I meant your written testimony, not your oral testimony from phase 2. Did your written testimony?
No, my written testimony did not speak to those specific data points. So my written testimony was not affected by the fact that those 3 points were based on an incorrect reference point elevation, which, by the way, we received from Cal-Am and then ultimately corrected. So no, my written testimony does not change and is not affected by the problems that this particular testimony speaks to.
When you speak of the map, that the map needed to be corrected, was the map submitted in conjunction with your phase 2 written testimony?
Yes, the map was submitted.
And that's something that at the time you submitted it, you were prepared to affirm it under penalty of perjury, right?
Yes, I was, and I still am, because the map, though those 3 data points were not correct, did not change, would not have changed, and did not change appreciably enough to change the factual content of my testimony. So that's that. I'm trying to be as clear as I possibly can.
If we could take a look, same exhibit, please. Page 13, lines 12 through 18, please. And actually, it's I'd like to start at line 16. You write, in words or substance, it is likely that injection of fresh water into the DSA and or upper 180-foot aquifer on the landward side of the proposed project would reduce the simulated impacts. My question to you is how? How would it reduce the simulated impacts?
Because it would create mounding proximal to the to the withdrawals that would offset the drawdown created by the extraction. And if you designed the location of those injections intelligently enough, you could design it such that it prevented the spread of drawdown inland.
And when you say reduce the simulated impacts, is that what you mean? Reduce the drawdown inland?
Reduce the simulated drawdown, yes. Okay. And if you reduce the simulated drawdown, then you would reduce the other the drawdown dependent impacts as well, such as simulated seawater intrusion.
Got it. Could water intrusion elsewhere help reduce or eliminate other potential simulated impacts?
Artificial recharge is what I believe I interpret your question to be referring to, and artificial recharge is used to offset the impacts of drawdown. So yes, it could be artificial recharge could be used to reduce the drawdown created by this project.
If we could please take a look at page 14. I have a question about the top sentence, sir. It says there is considerable uncertainty associated with the predictions rendered from both the MCWD and Cal-Am versions of the WSSM 2023, and the sentence goes on. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you tell me the considerable uncertainty associated with the MCWD modeling, not the Cal-Am modeling, but the MCWD modeling?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Your sentence says there is considerable uncertainty associated with the predictions rendered from both the MCWD and Cal-Am versions of the WBSSM. Do you see that portion of the sentence? My question to you is, what considerable uncertainty exists with the MCWD version of the WBSSM 2023? Not the Cal-Am version, the MCWD version.
Okay, sure. The uncertainty stems from the number one, from the lax constraint on calibration. So the model is calibrated to heads and not to flows. So whenever a model is calibrated only to heads, it increases the degrees of freedom, which means that it is more non-unique. So there are more possible scenarios or more possible configurations that would pass the calibration criteria. So we start with the flow model, and everything that flows down from the flow model. So the uncertainty associated with the poor constraint on calibration, in other words, not having flow data to calibrate against, renders considerable uncertainty in the flow modeling, and therefore everything that flows down from it. The transport modeling is then predicated on the flow modeling, so there's uncertainty associated with that. And the model was not calibrated to any kind of reliable transport related data. So for instance, it would be a common practice to have the ability to calibrate to a plume. So you would know all the conditions and calibrate to the measured change in concentration across the area over time. So we didn't have the ability to calibrate the transport component of the modeling to rigorous transport related information. And that results in additional uncertainty stacked on top of the uncertainty that was incorporated into the flow modeling. So those are two forms of, given without a whole lot of thought, that would be the first two that I would go to that define the basis for that statement in terms of considerable uncertainty.
Thank you. Any other considerable uncertainty regarding the MCWD version of the WBSSM 2023 model?
Well, we can go down the list and say that we are uncertain with respect, like I said, flows. So what does that mean? We don't have good constraint on how much flow is coming in from the ocean. We agreed to try to calibrate to a ballpark estimate of for ocean inflow, and that's one of the things that we did. We don't know the distribution of those ocean inflows. We don't know the amount of flow that's occurring in the amount of river gain or loss in the Salinas River downstream of the gauge between the last gauge and the coast. We agreed there to at least consider the assumption or the guess that was generated by Mr. Durbin from his modeling effort, but we don't have any hard data on that. And with respect to the TDS, as we have heard now, the drawdown, all of the test slant well information is not really reliable. So it's not a good source of calibration to try to constrain either the stress on the aquifer in terms of the amount of drawdown that was generated by the test slant well pumping, or the magnitude of ocean inflow that would have resulted in the TDS concentration measured at the test slant well due to the proximity to the infiltration ponds at the dredge pond and the CMEX operation. So those are all uncertainties that aren't constrained by data. And those are the kinds of things, those are now the three things that I can think of that are primary sources of uncertainty with respect to flow modeling and the transport modeling.
On line 9, you say both models underestimate groundwater elevations, and you go on. Again, my question is specific to the MCWD model. How did the MCWD model underestimate groundwater elevations?
By how? I need to understand what you're looking for with that word. Do you mean the magnitude of that underestimate, or do you mean how we came about to underestimate those flows?
I'm sorry, when you wrote the sentence, both models underestimate groundwater elevations. What did you mean as it relates to MCWD's model underestimating groundwater elevations?
I mean, that the model simulated head is less than the head recorded at the wells. So both models underestimate groundwater elevations at the coast in terms of comparing what the simulated value says to what the data says.
You write on line 11, bleeding into line 12, without correcting and recalibrating the models such that the heads along the coast are more accurately simulated, it is impossible to know how predicted seawater intrusion under the project pumping scenarios would differ from what is currently simulated. Do you see that?
On line 11, yes, I see that.
And you stand by the testimony that it's impossible to know how predicted seawater intrusion under the project pumping scenarios would differ from what is currently simulated, correct?
Objection, Mr. Testimony.
I stand by what I mean.
Hold on, Dr.
And
Kincaid, I'm thinking about the
sorry.
objection here.
sorry,
Thanks. I think, Mr. Betts, will you try it again? Although I think what Mr. Betts just said was actually a direct quote out of the testimony, but maybe Mr. Betts, will you try again and make sure we're following the testimony exactly?
You are correct. It is exactly what I just read is exactly what he wrote, which is, and the question again is, you stand by the testimony in the latter half of the sentence of, it is impossible to know how predicted seawater intrusion under the project pumping scenarios would differ from what is currently simulated, right?
And the objection is that he's ignoring the first half of the sentence, which puts a qualification on and explains why it's impossible.
Thank you, Mr. Brochard. I'm going to overrule the objection because you've helpfully pointed it out, and Dr. Kincaid can clarify in his response. So you go ahead, Dr. Kincaid.
thank you. Yes, because both models underestimate the heads on the coast. Both models are therefore predicting more seawater intrusion. Now, when you turn the project on, you're still overestimating seawater intrusion that was happening prior to the project being turned on. So this goes directly to a large amount of testimony that we've heard now about the position of the B1 and the B3 seawater intrusion front lines. And that's what I was talking about here. So if we're talking about looking at a map and saying, where is the seawater intrusion going to occur? Or where is it going to be in 25 years? Where's that line on the map going to be? Well, we can't, because we're underestimating seawater intrusion, we can be certain that we're not correctly estimating what that line on the map is going to be in the no project condition. And because of that, it's unreasonable to think that the B3 line would somehow overcome that and be correct. So without correcting the models and getting them to calibrate to the observed heads along the coast, in other words, simulate what those head maps show for like the spring 2021 data set, in terms of the heads being higher than sea level along the coast, then we can't rely on these groundwater models to reliably tell us what the seawater intrusion is going to be in the future, either with project pumping active or without it. So that's what I mean, and I stand by that testimony.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't ask you what you meant. Is my simple question is, do you stand by the phrase, it is impossible to know
Yes.
what's going on? So the answer to that's yes.
Yes.
If we could please take a look at exhibit 98, I think it's CalAm 98, and specifically PDF page 77. It should have a statement at the top, table 1, CalAm Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program. And that first paragraph is exactly where I was going. Thank you. Dr. Kincaid, have you ever seen this document before?
I can't recall, actually. I've looked at a lot of documents and without looking at it in more detail. I can't tell if it's one of the ones that I've looked at.
Into no tricks here. It's part of the PUC mitigation, monitoring, and reporting program. That refreshes your memory.
I have looked at some of the proposed monitoring plans or the monitoring results, but again, I can't be sure if I've looked at this particular document.
Okay, and if all possible, can we zoom in on that first paragraph, not where it says one, with the sentence beginning with prior to the start? Great. And look, I'm going to try to familiarize yourself with this document.
Okay.
And the project that it's talking about. I'm going to begin with the sentence that's about 4 lines down. It states in part, the program shall augment the NCWRA's existing regional groundwater monitoring network to focus on the area that could be affected by the proposed slant wells, period. The geographic area of the program shall be within the model domain of the North Marina groundwater model, comma, also referred to as NMG WM 2016, and include the dune sand aquifer, the 180-foot aquifer, the 400-foot aquifer, and the deep aquifer, and there's parentheticals. The purpose of the program is to ensure that owners of existing public or private groundwater supply wells within the Monterey area on the date of the MPWSP commences, slant well pumping suffers no harm as a result of the MPWSP slant well pumping. Do you see that, sir?
I do.
Hopefully I got it right. I may have misread a little bit here. Does that refresh your memory? This is referring to
Yes.
the project that we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you'd be kind enough to turn to the next page, 78. Perfect. And then if you could focus in on the second paragraph, beginning with the word, if the hydrologist. Okay, are you familiar with this mitigation measure? And I can read it to you maybe to make sure you understand it, okay?
You can read it to me or you can give me time to read it, but I would want to read it.
I'll give it a shot and I'll go slowly. I keep thinking there's a court reporter here, so that makes me go slow. If the hydrologist determines that a participating active supply well or an active supply well that CalAm and the hydrologist have verified for damage or adverse effects pursuant to section 4 above has been damaged or otherwise negatively affected by the MPWSP slant well pumping, CalAm and the hydrologist shall coordinate with the well owner to develop and implement a mutually agreed upon course of action, period. Such course of action may include, but not be limited to, repairing or deepening the existing well, restoring groundwater yield by improving well efficiency, facilitating an interim or long-term replacement of water supply, constructing a new well, or compensating the owner for increased pumping costs, period. Any interim or long-term replacement water supply shall be of the same or better quality, i.e. potable or non-potable, and predicted quality as the existing supply of the active supply well and shall be suitable for the purposes served by the existing active supply well, period. Do you see that?
Yes.
So this discusses a potential mitigation measure to take care of any simulated or hypothetical harm by the project, correct?
It discusses this as a potential mitigation effort or proposed mitigation effort. Yes.
And wouldn't these proposed mitigation efforts address or resolve or mitigate against any of the proposed harms that you've hypothecated about in this phase 3?
Objection
Not
to
in my-
speculation.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead, Dr. Kincaid.
Not in my opinion.
Have you told the PUC that you disagree or sought to overturn in any way this mitigation measuring?
Objection, objection, assumes facts not in evidence. Mr. Betts is essentially testifying that this is a PUC approved document and something that will happen. That's not my understanding of the document. I understand it's a proposal by CalAm and nothing more.
I think that's fair. It doesn't, Mr. Betts, and I don't want you to testify as to what. It sounds like there's disagreement about what this document is. Can you rephrase the question in a way that gets to your point without assuming what this document is?
Yeah. Has Marina Coast Water District sought in any way to address this mitigation monitoring, overturn it in any way that you're aware of?
Again, objection. It assumes it's something that needs to be overturned.
That's an argument. We can get into evidence later. I'm just asking him if he's aware of anything that whatsoever that's been done to address this or overturn or negate in any way whatsoever this mitigation monitoring plan. He's either aware of it or he's not.
But again, it assumes that something needed to be done.
Right. I think that's fair. I'm trying to think of a way to rephrase the question. I'll ask it generally, and we can go from there. Dr. Kincaid, are you aware of any agency action or discussion that any agency action that affects the mitigation and monitoring plan described here in this document?
I'm not aware of any agency action, no.
And are you aware of any discussion by relevant agencies that would affect whether or not this mitigation and monitoring plan might go into effect?
By agency, I guess the only discussion I'm aware of is discussions that I've had with respect to this. And I believe that might have involved the agency at some point in the past, in my past work. And my concern with this is that it doesn't have any teeth. And we can just go to our current effort right now and think about how much debate there has been about what is and what is not drawdown caused by the test slant well. So this infers or implies that you can somehow directly measure the impact of the pumping, and you can't. The only thing you can do is measure water levels, and then you have to interpret whether those water levels are affected by the project pumping. In other words, whether they're subject to drawdown. And that is going to be open for debate. So this, in my opinion, this implementation or this monitoring plan, while monitoring is always a good idea, it doesn't have any teeth. So it's not really a protective measure.
And Ms. Kinsey, I'd just like to point out this exhibit isn't in the record yet.
Okay, that's helpful.
Nor is his testimony, nor is his slides. So I don't think the rule is that you can only ask questions about things that are in testimony. We went through all of his direct testimony. None of that's in evidence.
Well, this has been, I mean, just to clarify, so I'm not misunderstanding, this is CalAm 98. It's been offered into evidence, but has not yet been accepted.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I think with that, Mr. Betts, I'll turn things back to you because I don't think we have an outstanding question, so we don't have an outstanding objection of any kind. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Well, you talked about a debate. That's a really good point, Dr. Kincaid. You understand there was a debate that went for years, that in fact, before the State Water Board and then the PUC, that led to 2 decisions by the PUC approving the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project, correct? You know that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
No one ever gave you those PUC decisions?
No, the PUC decisions are not directly relevant to my interpretation of groundwater models.
I'm sorry, once again, that's not my question. My question was simply, are you aware of the fact that the PUC
I said no,
considered?
I am not.
Did you ever ask for it, the PUC decisions?
I did not.
You were the Supreme Court denied a petition by the Marina Coast Water District to overturn or reverse those PUC decisions?
I'm not aware of that, no. Nor am I aware of any PUC decisions that have direct bearing on my interpretation of the groundwater models.
But then again, no one's given you the PUC decisions, so you wouldn't know if they do or don't, right?
I would be willing to bet that those decisions have little to do with the interpretation of the technical information embedded in the groundwater model. So I did not ask for those kinds of documents.
I'm sorry, I'm confused, sir. So under penalty of perjury, you're telling us that you haven't seen the PUC decision. So how would you know if they address many of the issues here or anything you're talking about?
Because those kinds of documents don't tend to have a strong bearing on the kinds of work that I tend to do, that I did, or am doing. So I don't ask for those kinds of documents in my due diligence in terms of looking for information to provide the background I need to do my job.
Going back to the document, the words on the page say something to the effect, such course of action may include, but not be limited to, repairing or deepening existing well, restoring groundwater yield by improving well efficiency, and I'm ellipsizing, facilitating an interim or long-term replacement of water, constructing a new well, and that any interim or long-term replacement water should be the same quality or better. And you're saying that's not, it's your testimony.
It's
That's
my
not-
testimony that, in
I
my
apologize.
opinion,
I wasn't
this-
done.
Dr.
Okay.
Kincaid, you have to wait at least for a
Apologize.
question. Thank you.
And it's your testimony that none of that has any teeth?
yes, it is my testimony that none of that has any teeth.
Okay.
From my experience, this is boilerplate language that is done whenever there's a potential impact on dispute between well users. And in order for it to be demonstrated that you have to, that there was an impact, you have to first agree on what is drawdown. And that requires an interpretation and therefore cannot be directly measured. And therefore this doesn't have any teeth.
And so it's your testimony that you are superior to the PUC in that they're just including boilerplate language that has no teeth.
Objection, he's assuming it's a PUC document again.
Well, I was going to have a different objection, which Mr. Betts, if you can avoid the word superior to the PUC, I don't, let's
Sure.
get down to the truth of the matter here. I mean, I understand your line of questioning, but please try that question again.
Sure, it's your opinion that the PUC is using boilerplate non-tooth related language.
Again, objection, he's assuming it's the PUC that's using the language.
I think we need to establish that fact, Mr. Betts. If you, it's the same problem here as we haven't, I don't think we've verified what this document is or what it's been approved to do.
Well,
If it's been approved
you know,
to
when we
do
went,
anything.
we had testimony from Mr. Teasdale, we had unpublished documents, we had reports that he hadn't done, and all sorts of issues. Questions were just asked. I think we'll get into evidentiary issues later.
How about this, Mr. Betts? Let's go to the first page of the, I don't even know what this
Sure.
document is.
I'll
let's
move
go-
on, but it just, yeah, let's go to the first page. I think
Can we go to the first page and just see what it is?
Sure.
That will help me. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. And if we can just scroll down. And can we go to the next page, please? And one more. Let's see what we get to here. All right. I am satisfied that this is at least what the title says. I understand, Mr. Burchard, your objection here that we haven't established here whether or not this program has been approved in any way. But I think we've established at least what the document says and that it's a PUC document.
But it was, I would stipulate that it was submitted to the PUC, but it hasn't been adopted by the PUC.
Okay. With that caveat, I think, Mr. Betts, you can ask your question and with this understanding that this has not been,
Well,
at least there's not evidence in the record that this has been adopted by the PUC.
all right, and we'll get into that when we discuss the evidence, but I can move on. I have a different document.
Okay. Thank you.
You could take this down, thank you. And I'm sorry, Ms. Kent, this is relevant to some of the issues that were flagged in the phase 3 order and some of the critical issues that I believe you'll be addressing. So that's why I'm going through these. The next, were the Coastal Commission. You recently testified before the Coastal Commission, did you? About the Callahan project? Yes.
No, no.
Did you ever see the Coastal Commission ruling regarding the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project?
No, I do not believe so.
No one showed that to you either?
I don't, not in its entirety, no.
Some of it?
Perhaps. I know that we discussed the Coastal Commission decision
With whom?
with my team, with Mr. Brochard and with the legal team.
And what was discussed?
Was discussed. It's hard to keep track. Are we talking about the construction of the desalination plant? Is that what we're talking about?
I wasn't there, so I don't know what was discussed. I know
Yeah.
that there was a coastal commission ruling. I think Ms. Nelson testified. I think it was adverse to Marina Coast Water District. That's what I know, but I don't know what you all discussed.
So my knowledge of that is not very deep. So I'm not going to try to guess about that. It wasn't part of my agenda to evaluate that document or those findings.
Do you know why someone wouldn't have given you that document or shown you those findings?
Again,
Speculation.
I'm going to overrule it. Go ahead and answer, Dr. Kincaid. You can be.
It's not the kind of document I would have asked for, or I asked for. It's not immediately relevant to my interpretation, my construction of a groundwater model, and my interpretation of existing groundwater models to understand how the groundwater system in that area works and what the potential impacts of this proposed project might be. So I didn't ask for those kinds of documents.
How would you know that it wouldn't impact your work if you haven't even seen it?
Mr. Betts, there are literally millions of documents out there. And part of my job is to try to narrow down the types of documents that I would like to look at in order to determine, be able to do my job better. Now, do I sometimes not get every single document that might be relevant? Yes, but it is impossible for me to look at all those documents, and those kinds of documents are generally not the kinds of documents that I seek in order to do my job. So I would not expect that to have the kind of information that would have a bearing on my interpretation of the groundwater flow system, or my ability to simulate it, or the ability of another model to simulate that.
Are you aware that Ms. Nelson testified before the Coastal Commission?
I'm aware that there has been discussion amongst our team about the Coastal Commission and testimonies and things like that. I have not had a direct conversation about that testimony with her or anybody else. And there have been conversations about it. I was present. And to some extent, I can remember that, but I don't remember exactly what was said or how it was or wasn't relevant.
Can we take a look at Exhibit 125, please?
Who's?
I believe it'd be ours, the Coastal Commission decision.
I think we were looking for MCWD one. No, this is
Maybe it's
this right?
MCWD 125. I mean,
Yeah.
someone may know that. Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. I apologize.
That might be right. I'm not sure.
That looks like it. Thank you again. I appreciate that. I would like to take a look at PDF page 29. And I want to focus on that special condition 12. And thank you so much. That's perfect. Dr. Trudell, are you aware of this monitoring and remedial measures to protect groundwater issued by the Coastal Commission?
It's just for the record, it's Dr. Kincaid. not
Kincaid.
Dr. Trudell.
My apologies. I try to show respect. I certainly meant Dr. Kincaid.
I'm sorry, you asked if I was aware of this, and I'm not. Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
I'm not aware. I'm not aware of. I did not look at this document.
All right. If you take your time, if we could scroll through special condition 12, take as much time as you need to read it. I'm not going to read the whole thing.
Okay.
You could briefly familiarize yourself with it. And it's your testimony again that you've never seen this, right?
I don't believe I have seen this document. No.
Okay. So with that, if you could just
Yeah,
read through this, and then
reading it.
you'd be kind enough to let us know when you want us to go down.
Can you scroll down, please? And continue to scroll down, please. And continue to scroll down, please. And continue to scroll down, please. And continue to scroll down. And continue to scroll down, please. Okay, I've read through D.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to look at it. Does this special condition 12 implemented by the Coastal Commission help mitigate or eliminate any hypothetical harm
There's a lot wrapped into this special
I'm
condition
sorry,
12.
I was going slowly. Let me just finish the question. Does this special condition 12 help mitigate or alleviate any potential harm caused by the project as you hypothesize in your phase 3 testimony?
I'm gonna object that it calls for speculation, and that he implies it's been implemented. The special condition calls for a plan that is not yet created.
You know, I don't know if we're doing speaking objections. I mean, he's the expert. It's a pretty simple question, but testifying for him is not fair.
Hold on a second. There is a good question here, and I do want to hear Dr. Kincaid's response. I think maybe I'll attempt to rephrase it as Dr. Kincaid, as you understand the proposal in this special condition 12, in your opinion, just based on reading the document you have before you, would implementation of special condition 12 mitigate or alleviate any of the harm that you testified about, that you addressed in your testimony with respect to the slant well project?
Well, first, this is the first time I've read this. So I read this, and if I were making a recommendation to somebody based on my reading of this, I would say that it is a promising description of a future that is a long way from being present. This special condition 12 talks about modeling that has not been done, validation of that modeling against data that has not been collected, and then a discussion or a design of the monitoring plan, the modeling, and the statistical basis for which harm is defined that is not yet been defined nor reviewed by the one or more independent third-party reviewers that the executive director, and I presume that would be the executive director of the Marina Coast Water District, would hire to evaluate the applicant's proposals and then determine whether they were agreeable. So assuming that all of that is accomplished and that both the applicant and the executive director are in agreement about exactly what the monitoring plan would be, about what the modeling would do, the degree of validation that would be proven, and the definition of harm, and that both parties are in agreement to those things, then I think this special condition 12 does lay out a framework that would presumably under which both parties could move forward. But that would be how I would describe it if I was asked by the executive director to provide comment on special condition 12. That comes close to what I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Kincaid. And just for my understanding, I just want to make sure that I'm not sure who now I don't know who the executive director is. I'm at the risk of trying to solicit testimony from the attorneys.
Coastal Commission.
Is it the Coastal Commission executive director? Is
Yes.
it referenced here, not MCWD executive director? I just wanted to clarify that.
That's my understanding.
Well, then that would be a point of concern to me. To the extent that I understand who the executive director of the Coastal Commission is, the parties that are at risk should be part of that, because in the end of the day, it's the definition of harm that provides the teeth necessary to make something enforceable. So again, we're talking, this special condition 12 lays out, and basically what I interpret it to mean is that we're going to develop modeling that describes what the impacts are going to be. We're going to design a monitoring plan that's specifically intended to be used to validate the modeling. And by validate, it means that you wait some period of time, maybe a year or so, 2 years, you collect information, and then you compare the information that you collected against what the model predicted it would be. So for instance, you might say, this is what I think the TDS is going to be 2 years from now at this particular monitoring well. And then you would go 2 years out and see if your model validated, or if it matched it. And presumably, if it did, then you would have confidence in your model and you can continue to move forward. And if it didn't, then you would engage in some kind of corrective action with the modeling so that you could revise your predictions. And then there would have to be, which this plan does talk about, it talks about designing and then agreeing to a stringent criteria and statistical method for evaluating those criteria to determine when and where harm occurs. So all of those things would have to be designed and agreed to. And if the party, in this case, I've been hired at least indirectly by MCWD. If I was asked by the executive director of MCWD if this plan was protective of their interests, I would say that it's promising, but only if you or your representatives are part of that committee that get to decide on all of those terms. So that would be, I've had experience with things like this in Florida and in Pennsylvania, to some extent in New York, and usually the parties, everybody comes together and you end up with some kind of agreement to all of those things.
Thank you, Dr. Kincaid, and thank you, Mr. Betts. I realize this was an aside from your process.
No, I
Appreciate
think
that information.
I think this is really important. And speaking of the parties, they got together for a long, long time, went through several hearings with the.
I just want to make sure this is going to end in a question, Mr. Betts. I'm turning this back to you. Okay.
You understand that this Coastal Commission Special Condition 12 has been adopted after the parties and the public all had several meetings, and now it's being appealed by the Marina Coast Water District?
I told you I'm not familiar with the process by which this is the first time I've read it, so I don't have any knowledge of it being approved or debated or anything like that.
Got it. Thank you for that. We could take that one down. If we
Mr.
could take,
Betts, can we do a time check if we're going to move on to another document? I think the witness has been going for about an hour. I want to do a time check on your cross-examination and then also probably take a break for about 10 minutes.
oh yeah, you bet. So you want the time check from me? I thought maybe I misunderstood that we were going to get the same time as the cross-examination of our experts. I think they went for 2 some odd hours and 15 minutes. I do not intend to go that long.
Great. I just meant an estimate of what you have remaining is essentially what I'm looking for.
You mean in terms of time?
Yeah.
I less than an hour.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. If this is a good time for that break.
Oh yeah, you bet, whenever.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We will return at 10:23, and then you can pick up where we left off, Mr. Betts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
David, FYI, your camera's still on.
All right, it looks like we have the four of us back anyway, so I will hand things back over to you, Mr. Betts. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, and we'll deal with this on evidence, but I believe that CalAm Exhibit 68 is the PUC decision, prior decision approving this project, D.18-09-017. For some reason, I haven't figured off the cup. All the appendices to that decision weren't part of that exhibit. Appendices D is the mitigation monitoring program, which everyone discussed was going to be updated. The document that I've been using or was using, and again, I'll follow all this up, that being Exhibit 98 was the updated version. And as a matter of credibility, we pulled that right off the PUC website, which shows that it was adopted and approved, all of which we will show to you later, but wanted to clarify that.
So wait, let me just make sure I get this right. We have CalAm 68, which is the PUC decision.
Correct, which we also think is equally important for all sorts of reasons, but that's D.18-09-017. That is correct. That's CalAm 68. I believe that's already in the record. It attaches Appendix A, but not the mitigation monitoring program for reasons I don't recall. But the document that I used is the Appendix D, which is the updated mitigation monitoring and reporting program, which again, we could all, but I will show you exactly where at some point we pulled off the PUC website.
But it is also, am I understanding this correctly? It is also CalAm 98.
That is correct. Yes, thank you. The updated one is CalAm 98. Yes, correct.
Ms. Kinsey, this is Ms. Muzine. You'll still see me as mute because I'm using Ms. Nelson's microphone.
Great.
There was some discussion about this in great detail, I believe in December. And CalAm's attorneys may recall that Mr. Betts is actually mistaken. Exhibit CalAm 98 is not Exhibit D to the PUC's 2018 decision. Exhibit CalAm 98 is a 2019 document proposed by CalAm, but it has not been acted on by the PUC. I believe Mr. Osias was part of this discussion with Mr. Lilly back in December, and the transcript will show that that's the situation. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't say 98 is Exhibit D. Exhibit D was the initial one. As I said, it was updated per all parties discussion, and the updated one is Exhibit 98. And we will discuss what.
And I understand that CalAm has updated Exhibit D and presented it, but Exhibit 98 has not been approved by the Public Utilities Commission.
And I think we're talking about Appendix D. Is Appendix D to the decision in the record? Or has it been offered into the record? Does it have an exhibit number?
I believe, Ms. Kinsey, it is part of the AHO's historic documents file, along with the full PUC decision from September 2018. That's decision D.18-09-017, and it's got a number of appendices, including Appendix D.
Okay, thank you very much.
But that was dated as of September 2018.
And we have in, I don't know in the record or not, but CalAm 131 is an August 2018 mitigation monitoring and reporting program. So at the next break, I'll check to see if that's Appendix D.
Okay, thank you. I mean, thank you for going through this. It will just remind me that I need to be very careful about different versions of similar documents. Appendix D or the monitoring and mitigation monitoring program in particular. I will turn back to you, Mr. Betts. Is there anything else before you return to your cross-examination?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
May we please take a look at Exhibit 67, the return water settlement agreement? I believe it's CalAm 67. My question to you, Dr. Kincaid, will be the same. Have you seen this settlement agreement on the MP WSP desalination plant return water?
I have not looked at this document, but I have had discussions about the return water agreement.
What is your understanding of CalAm's obligation to return water generated from the project?
My understanding is that it is based on the calculation of OWP, and that the the balance of water, the non-OWP water, would be returned as a this return water agreement to I'm embarrassed, the name falls off of my
Castroville?
tongue. Castroville, yes,
Sorry.
thank you. Sorry about that. Would be returned to Castroville to the extent that replace to the extent that that it balances the water that's being groundwater that's being pumped by Castroville, and that any if the 1 minus the OWP is greater than what Castroville uses, that the balance of that water would then be distributed through the CSIP program to other users.
And would you agree that would help or mitigate in some form any alleged harm to the
Yes.
basin? Okay.
Sorry for interrupting you.
No problem. I believe you said yes, correct?
I did, yes.
And please tell us how it'll benefit.
Well, it would benefit the aquifer most directly. It would benefit the aquifer that it's where the water is being returned to, aquifer or aquifers that the water is being returned to. So to use it as an example, the return flow scenario that CalAm produced returns the water to the 400-foot aquifer. So the expectation would be that the primary benefit would be to the 400-foot aquifer in the vicinity or the area where the water is returned. And that becomes complicated because of the CSIP arrangement. You'd have to know where that water gets delivered. So that's what, in my opinion, that's what makes this a complicated scenario to evaluate, or potential to evaluate.
And I believe we were talking about your answer yes to my question. And my follow-up question is, isn't water also supposed to be returned to the 180-foot aquifer?
It's not my understanding. My understanding is that the water would be returned to Castroville. So if Castroville is pumping the water from the 400-foot aquifer, then the return water, this water would be in lieu of what's pumping. So the water would be that pumping would be shut down. So that benefit would be to the aquifer that the well was pumping from. So in the case of CalAm's return water, to use that as an example, in the case of that return water simulation, that benefit was primarily in the 400-foot aquifer, because all of the wells that CalAm turned off were pumping from the 400-foot aquifer.
And are you testifying for sure under penalty of perjury that none of the water could hypothetically be returned to the 180-foot aquifer? Do you know that?
No.
I'm gonna object on vague. I'm not sure what Mr. Betts is talking about when he says return to the 180-foot aquifer. The water goes to users, not to an aquifer.
I'll come off mute. That will help. Mr. Betts, if you would clarify the question as to what you mean in respect to return.
So I guess the question is, did the witness understand it? But when you were just talking about the 400-foot aquifer, what is your understanding of what would happen in the in lieu recharge to the 400-foot aquifer with the return water?
Once again, it's my understanding that the return water agreement specifies that the water, the 1 minus the OWP, whatever that ultimately is agreed on, will be primarily and first delivered to Castroville in lieu of, therefore in lieu recharge, if you will, in lieu of pumping that Castroville is engaged in to produce its water supply. So that water would then be delivered, and the well and a commensurate amount of water would be shut down in terms of pumping. If the delivered water exceeds the amount of water that's being pumped by Castroville, the balance of that water would be distributed to other users in the CSIP program. That is my understanding of the return water agreement.
Got it. Thank you for that. We could take that one down if that's okay. Dr. Kincaid, was there a consensus among the experts to use 11 model layers, which included model layer 1 representing the seabed as it relates to this phase 3 proceeding?
Yes, there was a general consensus agreement to use those 11 layers.
And in fact, I think a joint report was sent to the AHO in which the parties specifically agreed in writing that they were going to use 11 model layers, correct?
I have to take your word for it. I know that we agreed to it, and I would assume that it got written into an agreement. Yes.
Right. And I don't want anybody to assume. So if possible, I'm not sure if we could pull up, it was a joint status report submitted on March 14, 2023. It may have even gotten loaded the following day. If there's any way that we could put that up, it'd be greatly appreciated, just the first page.
Give us a moment. Let's see. I think we're all going to, the team is pitching in here.
Thank you very much.
And can you just repeat the date of that? It was March.
You bet. March 14, 2023. It's called
Thank you.
Joint Status Report, I believe.
And Ms. Kenzie, if I could, just what aspect of the phase 3 testimony is this going to be relevant to?
I think that's a fair question, Mr. Betts.
I think all of it, of what the parties agreed to use and what he didn't use.
The flow model doesn't really have anything to do with the the flow models affect the transport model, but that's not directly related to this phase. If you had questions about the construction of the flow model, that's what all of phase 2 is about.
Still think it's relevant cross-examination and touches on issues that he raised in direct.
I'm
There
going to,
was-
I'm sorry, go ahead. There's another voice here.
I was just going to say there was extensive testimony challenging the validity of the flow model in certain ways by Dr. Trudell and Dr. Trudell, and in the written testimony of everybody, and in the cross-examination. So the fact that the transport model is built on the flow model doesn't make the flow model irrelevant, obviously.
And I am going to overrule the objection. I would like to hear the testimony in part. Maybe it's just, frankly, it is somewhat helpful to me. I think it is involved in the direct testimony. It's also helpful to me since I wasn't sitting in front of the camera for phase 2. So I will allow that. I'm going to look to my team to see if in the meantime we have found the document. Looks like we have. There we go.
You have a magician. Thank you very much. So again, I don't want you to take my word for it, but let's take a look at first under number 1.
Actually, can we just pause for a moment? Ms. Mullen, do you mind? You just had the name of the file up, just to make sure that everyone else can identify this, find this file. So we have it on the AHO FTP site as 2023-03 15 joint status report. So if anyone else is following along and wants to find this document, that is how it is labeled on our AHO FTP site. All right, thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Betts.
Thank you. So this is the joint status report to which I referred. And if you look at under number 1, it says,
Yes.
both
Sorry.
parties agree to accommodate 11 model layers in a new 2023 model. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And that's what the parties agreed to, correct?
Yes, it is.
And if we go down to number 3, 3A specifically, and 3A lists the 11 model layers, correct?
Yes.
And layer 1 was the seabed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and we could take that down. Thank you. And in fact, you did not use 11 model layers with the seabed constructing model layer 1, correct?
Correct.
Did you inform CalAm or the AHO that you're going to deviate from the agreement and not use model layer 1?
It was written in my report, and exactly what we did was written in my report that was delivered in testimony.
Okay, prior to your issuing the report, when all the parties were working together on what they agreed to, and up to the time that you issued your report, did you tell anyone that you were going to not use model layer 1 as everyone agreed to?
My decision to deviate from that plan occurred after the parties stopped working together. And so, no, I didn't make a special call to tell them that we were changing the strategy.
Why, Dr. Kincaid? The parties have worked for a long time to comply with Mr. Lilly's rules of trying to get rid of uncertainties, and everyone agreed to use model layer 1. Why did you decide not to use model layer 1, or more importantly, tell anybody before you submitted your testimony?
Decided not to use model layer 1 because I did not believe it was in the best interest of producing the best and most reliable model that I could produce. And multiple times, Mr. Lilly, and I explained to Mr. Lilly what I generally wanted to do and why. And he explicitly told both parties that he wanted them to reach agreement on everything that they could, but he didn't want that to come at the expense of producing the best model that they felt like they could produce. So you please let me finish, because you asked me why I chose to omit use of layer 1. So I chose to omit the use of layer 1 because after we stopped at one of the last things we agreed to, joint parties, is to abandon the use of equivalent freshwater heads. Prior to I believe it was our last meeting, all along, including the writing of that report, we had agreed and were striving to use equivalent freshwater heads, which means that we would be accounting for variable thickness of the seabed in the construction of the model, which would have meant that having the seabed expressly represented in the model design would be very important. And so that was why we had that layer specifically in the design. At the end, we decided to abandon the use of equivalent freshwater heads, specifically because we couldn't reach agreement with Cal-Am as to how to achieve calibration targets for equivalent freshwater heads in the inland wells that are affected by higher TDS. So once we abandon that, the use of layer 1 is more complicated, because whether you do it through hydraulic conductivities or you do it through constant head boundaries, you have to tell the model where you believe it has a vertical hydraulic connection to the ocean. Cal-Am achieved that with their 11-layer model with the use of very high vertical hydraulic conductivities in the ocean component of layer 2. And we achieved that with the use of constant head boundaries, which I could direct my team to change quite easily, such that we could evaluate how the position of hydraulic connection between the ocean and the underlying submarine portions of the aquifers affect the simulation of the groundwater flow system. And that, as it turns out, is very important. As I've said multiple times, this whole dilemma boils down to the balance between the amount of recharge and fresh water that comes in from the dune sand aquifer and the amount of inflow from the ocean that comes in, obviously, from the ocean. And so being able to simulate that is really critical. And it is my experience that through the calibration process, you learn more about the system by running more iterations. So anything you can do to facilitate the rapidity with which a model simulation can be run is better. The 11-layer model took many minutes to run, multiple minutes to run. The simplified 10-layer model took less than a minute to run. And that may not sound like a lot, but when we're running tens or hundreds of simulations, it adds up, especially when we have a tight deadline to meet. So my decision to change to the 10-layer model was done to generate what I believe to be a better simulation, a more reliable simulation of the groundwater flow system, which I believe is directly complicit or complies with Mr. Lilly's intent, which was for us to build the best model that we could, while also agreeing to the extent that we can on the components of that design. Why didn't I not reach out immediately and tell them? Because it didn't occur to me to do that. By that time, we had split apart and we were working independently. And to be honest, we were under the gun. We continued working on the calibration right up until nearly midnight on the day that it was due. So that was not an intended slight. It was just, I didn't think that it was really relevant. I had no reason to believe they would deviate from their plan simply because I chose to deviate from the plan.
Dr. Kincaid, you agreed, and we all submitted something on March 14th that said 11 model layers were going to be used, correct?
Correct.
And you deviated from that and didn't tell anyone from CalAm or the State Water Board that you were going to unilaterally change this until you submitted your testimony, correct?
Correct.
And wouldn't you imagine that CalAm experts also want to deviate and make all sorts of other changes? But we stuck to our agreement. Dr. Kincaid, we used the 11 model layers, correct?
Correct. You use the 11 model layers.
Is there a seabed in the Monterey Bay through which ocean water flows?
Yes, there is. And we simulate that.
Let me ask you, in general, you would agree that less inland groundwater pumping is better for limiting seawater intrusion, correct?
I'm sorry, what?
As a general statement, you would agree with me that less inland groundwater pumping is better for limiting seawater intrusion.
Yes, I would agree that reducing inland pumping will tend to reduce seawater intrusion.
And did you read the MPWSP EIR, the environmental impact report, relative to the groundwater modeling conducted by Hydrofocus?
I did. It was some time ago, but I did, yes.
In fact, you commented on it from my recollection, correct?
Yes, I did.
And did Hydrofocus simulate in lieu recharge in the Castrofo area, as we were talking about earlier, related to return water from the project?
I believe they did, yes.
Does scenario D for this proceeding, created by Marina Coast and the city, have reduced pumping only in the 180, 400-foot aquifer subbasin?
Yes.
Is the in lieu recharge from the MPWSP return water that reduces groundwater pumping in the 180, 400-foot aquifer subbasin consistent with your scenario D?
No, I don't. It's consistent in that the reduction occurs in the same subbasin, but it's not consistent with respect to the fact that you're talking about a singular or a very directed or targeted place with respect to Castroville, and scenario D is a more broad, widespread reduction in pumping that is aimed specifically at reducing seawater intrusion.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you conduct any model runs to evaluate in lieu recharge from return water flows from the project?
Yes, we did.
Where?
We conducted those in-house and evaluated them and determined that we didn't want to continue with those because the CSIP program rendered the program, the design of that scenario speculative. So in other words, the return flow agreement again says that only the portion that's returned to Castroville is what they use. It was I didn't determine this, but it was determined that Castroville only uses about 700 acre feet per year, I believe. And so the remainder of a roughly 1,200 or 1,500 acre feet per year return flow would have to be distributed to other users. And we looked at a couple of different scenarios that produced different impacts, but in the end, it's very speculative. And those changes were as expected. You get different, you get reductions in the simulated drawdown due to the return flow, but the distribution of those is going to be dependent on the design, which we don't have a good handle on the design. So we didn't feel that it was appropriate to really propose one.
So did any of your model runs or any of your testimony evaluate in lieu recharge from the return flows from the project? Can we look at anything you've submitted that has that analysis?
We did not submit any of the analysis for the return flows, no.
Or model runs, correct?
Or model runs that were related to return flows, no.
And moving to a different issue, you used hydraulic conductivity as a calibration parameter, correct?
Yes,
And recharge, you use recharge as a calibration parameter, right?
correct.
And you also used ocean constant head boundary types and locations, correct?
Not types, but locations, yes.
What about evapotranspiration?
That was not used as a calibration parameter. I don't, we did use it, but it was not varied for as part of calibration.
One moment. Are you sure about that?
I'm not 100% sure of that. Our calibration involved multiple steps. I know it wasn't used in the final steps for calibration.
Doesn't use of several different calibration parameters in a steady state model make the overall model calibration more uncertain?
No, in fact, it improves it. So being able to calibrate to multiple different types of hydraulic processes is a far superior methodology than assuming all of those processes to be certain and fixed, when in fact there's no data to constrain them. So recharge in particular is a very important function to consider as part of calibration, because it has such a strong effect on the groundwater flow field, and because it cannot be measured with any level of certainty. It can only be estimated. So in my experience, which I've been doing this exact same process on multiple different projects across different states, is that you use all of those key processes that are uncertain as part of your calibration effort. And you look at those within ranges of reasonable values, which is what we did. We varied the recharge within the range of values that was reported for the dune sand aquifer area by the modeling that was done by EKI. And then we looked at how variations in that value affects the results. So I disagree with you categorically, and can't emphasize more that calibration to multiple different types of aquifer properties is the appropriate way to move forward in modeling.
Well, I understand why recharge and hydraulic conductivity can be used, but once you start using others, isn't the purpose just to make it more uncertain so you can argue?
No, the purpose is not to make it more uncertain.
Okay.
And in this case, the ocean, the one you're referring to, is the position of the constant head boundary in the ocean, which is immediately akin to the magnitude of vertical hydraulic conductivity in the zones in layer 2 in the CalAm model. So no matter how you do it, you have to tell the model where and how the aquifer bodies are hydraulically connected to the sources of constant head or water. So in this case, we have aquifers that are vertically adjacent to an ocean. Now, we both used the geologic maps, and the hydrostratigraphy for both models shows the extent of those units extending out underneath the seafloor. But that doesn't tell anything about how or where the water from the ocean can finally equilibrate, the heads equilibrate to those conditions. So the position of the constant head boundary is specifically done to say, this is where I think the ocean becomes hydraulically connected to the aquifer on those layers. And you can do the same thing with the 11-layer model, and when CalAm did it, by using different hydraulic conductivity zones for the same aquifer in the ocean that are designed in for the landward component of the aquifer. Now, that's a complete construct designed to facilitate hydraulic connection. So there's no data to suggest that the material itself changes in character as you move from the land to the ocean. So it is a modeling construct to facilitate hydraulic connection. And in their case, it was done through PEST, and the computer said, oh, I need more water here to drive the heads and make a better calibration. So we end up with vertical hydraulic conductivities that are 5 times higher offshore than they are onshore. And it's not that I'm saying that that's wrong. We don't have any data to say that it's wrong or it's right. But what I am saying is that effectively, that is exactly the same thing. It achieves the same process, the same result as the spatial position of the constant head boundary assigned to those aquifers. And it was my opinion that I could have my team run more simulations to test more possible configurations by using the simplified method than by using the more complex method. And it has later, revealed a different benefit to me, which is that we're sitting here having this conversation about two methods of achieving exactly the same thing. And the difference is that there's a pretense that says that you somehow did it differently. And in fact, you didn't. Those vertical hydraulic connectivities are designed specifically, and they do facilitate hydraulic connection to the ocean. So you could take a look at the drawdown maps and compare the drawdown map for the upper 180-foot aquifer, layer 4 in the Marina Coast model, and layer 5 in the Cal-Am model. And you can see that there's more drawdown extends further offshore in the Marina Coast model than it does in the Cal-Am model. And what that says is that there's hydraulic connection closer to the coast in the Cal-Am model than there is in the Marina Coast model, which was achieved by the vertical hydraulic connectivities. So the fact that drawdown goes to 0 means that it meets the recharge boundary, and then it gets all the water that it needs, and drawdown can't extend any farther. So this is, it does, using the position of the constant head boundary and calibration was, obviously, I think it's a good decision. I made it, but what it did was allow us to generate many more simulations to evaluate the plausibility of where the aquifer actually does become connected.
Thank you. I respectfully move to strike. I don't think he's answering throughout today my questions. It was a basic question about including different variables makes it more uncertain. But I would ask that he be admonished to answer my questions.
I'm going to deny the motion to strike because I think this is helpful. This is all helpful for my understanding. I understand, Mr. Betts, that this cross-examination is taking longer than you probably anticipated because of the long response. But I will certainly ask Dr. Kincaid to answer your questions directly if he goes off course. But what question, you may not recall because it's been a while, what question do we have outstanding?
I'm not sure. He just wasn't answering any of the questions. I'll move on, but if we could just get my questions answered, it would really help us get through our proceeding today. Moving on, the MCWD WB SSN 2023 uses a vertical ocean constant head boundary condition that extends from top to bottom of the Sundan aquifer adjacent to the shoreline, right?
Which aquifer? The constant head boundaries are vertical through the respective layers, yes.
Okay. And is this where the ocean water enters the dune sand aquifer in your model?
This is where the heads equilibrate. So the ocean water can enter across the full extent, but it is where the heads equilibrate.
Okay, let me if we go with my question, please, and that is simply, is where the ocean water enters the dune.
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. It's my bad. Please.
No, I just, again,
finish your question.
Answer my questions. I know you have a lot to say, and we're all going to get a brief a lot of this, but answering my questions today would really be helpful. My question is where does the ocean water enter the dune sand aquifer in your model?
It enters through the entirety of the exposure between the ocean. It enters everywhere between the coastline and the position of the constant head boundary.
Okay, and you set a groundwater elevation, I think, of +3 feet for the data being used in your model. Is that correct?
The constant head boundary was set to 2.97 feet, which is equal to mean sea level NAVD 88.
And does that 2.97 feet represent the ocean head without accounting for density and freshwater equivalent heads?
That's correct. It does not account for equivalent freshwater head.
And you set the TDS value for this boundary, I believe, at 29,800 mgls, milligrams per liter. Is that correct?
I believe, I don't know the exact number, but that sounds right for the layer 1 of our model, the dune sand aquifer.
Okay, but it is 29,800 mgls the TDS of ocean water?
No, it is not.
Okay. Moving on, you stated your underestimation, I think, of coastal groundwater level is due to not enough recharge. Is that correct?
I believe that that is the primary driver. Yes,
And when you were calibrating the model, you used recharge as a calibration parameter, right?
that's correct.
So let me ask you, in your PEST and or manual calibration runs, did you allow recharge to go higher than your final calibrated value?
No, we did not.
So you could have explored using higher recharge in your final calibrated model, but you chose not to. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you also have indicated that your original calibrated model, the one submitted on June 1st, had too much seawater intrusion, correct?
Correct.
And let me ask, how much seawater intrusion did that original calibrated model have versus the targeted amount of seawater intrusion?
I believe it had about 35,000 acre feet per year in the upper aquifers.
And how much seawater intrusion did your first revision to your calibrated model, the June 12th one, have after all the changes you made to the boundary conditions and hydraulic conductivity?
I believe it had about 20,000 acre feet per year.
Let me ask, was your first revised model, the June 12th model, better or worse calibrated to groundwater levels than your original calibrated model submitted on June 1?
It was worse.
But you decided to use the worst calibrated model because it overestimated seawater intrusion to a lesser degree than the original calibrated model?
That's correct.
I'm sorry, it's correct?
That's correct.
Did you try to go back to the original model layering with the seabed as model layer 1 to see if that would help alleviate your excessive seawater intrusion?
No, because it would not have.
But you didn't go back and do that analysis using model layer 1, correct?
No, it did not.
Some of the southern model, let me try it this way. You were previously concerned that the southern model boundary was too close to the MCW wells and would limit model drawdown in that area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is the dune sand aquifer ocean constant head boundary in the MCWD model adjacent to the seashore? To the shoreline, to put it better.
The constant head boundary is adjacent to the shoreline, yes.
And I'm sorry, let me go back. When you had your concerns about the southern model boundary line being too close to the wells, how close was it? About a mile, mile and a half?
Something like that, yes.
Okay. And going back to the question I was asking, the dune sand aquifer constant head boundary is how close to the shoreline?
It's adjacent to the shoreline.
So feet right next to it, right?
It's the shoreline, yes.
Okay. We could take a look at MCWD 176 PDF page 5. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. I want to take a look at the third bullet point And I believe you write on June 12, our June 12 submission improved on a simulation of what we believe to be an unreasonable estimation of total ocean inflow occurring above the deep aquifer period. Do you see that?
Yes.
And was this revised model submission due to what you perceive to be a mistake in the way you translated Mr. Durbin's heads to MCWD's model layers?
Yes.
Now, let's take a look at Marina 43 PDF pages 30 and 31. And to orient everyone, I believe that's Dr. Trudell's testimony. And it's again, pages 30 and 31, paragraphs 96 and 97. So it's at the very bottom. If you could quickly read Dr. Trudell's explanation on 96 and 97 to yourself, it would be appreciated.
Could you go to the next page, please? Okay, I've read it.
Okay, you see that Dr. Trudell has a different explanation for the revised model submission, specifically regarding incorrect K-value assignments.
I do see that he's referring to the hydraulic conductivity values. Yes.
So who's telling the truth? Is it you or him that properly explained the purpose of the revised model submission?
The purpose of the revised model submission is me. I don't believe that he was lying. I believe that he focused on a different aspect of the change when he wrote this statement.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by that? So he has a different explanation than yours.
No, all of these things are, both of these things are true. Everything that has been said is true. We recognize that there was too much ocean inflow. As soon as we identified there was too much ocean inflow, we started to investigate the model. We determined that the hydraulic conductivity zones were extremely high for the lower layers, in particularly the 400-foot aquifer, and it was 500 feet per day, and that seemed unreasonable. We continued to explore and realized that our boundary conditions, and this, particularly the southern boundary, weren't assigned correctly. We explored that problem, realized that the boundary condition assignments we had made a mistake, and that if we had done that, and if we had translated them as we intended to translate them from the heads that were delivered to us by Mr. Durbin, that they would have resulted in a different boundary condition assignment, from which we surmised that the past calibration probably, generated the higher hydraulic conductivities as a consequence of the boundary condition assignment. So we went back, we changed the boundary condition assignment, and then we reran it, and sure enough, the pest lowered the hydraulic conductivity in those particular zones, which resulted in less simulation of ocean inflow. And therefore, we confirmed that this was the reason that generated this was the cause of the problem that resulted in the too much ocean inflow to the boundary. So all of those things are true, but the actual reason that the change was made was because of the ocean inflow, not because of an observation that the hydraulic conductivity was high.
And I apologize, when you say we, like you and Dr. Trudell, or you and your team and Dr. Trudell's team did something separate?
Dr. Trudell was a party to this in terms of he sat on our discussions and listened to what we were doing. But the people that I worked directly with to develop and calibrate the groundwater model included myself, included Brian Peck, who sits in my virtual office, and Aaron Lewis, who sits in EKI's office.
Got it. So I guess where I'm confused, if he was part of this, why do you have two different explanations? Why didn't you both come up with the same explanation versus what appears to be different ones?
Well, I cannot speak to exactly why Dr. Trudell came up and wrote what he wrote. I can say that we didn't sit together and collaborate on our actual testimonies, but he is correct that the hydraulic conductivities did change. And my suspicion is that he felt that that was the most important thing to talk about. So he talked about that in his testimony.
Moving on, I have some questions about the mod flow models and the data format from phase 2 and phase 3. And my first just background question is, and this could be taken down, thank you. Did you provide model input and output files for the phase 2 MCWD flow model predictive model scenarios to Callum experts and the AHO?
I believe we provided our predictive model scenarios on or about June 18th for A1, B1, C1, and D1.
And did you prepare those files, or you and your team?
My team preparing the files, mostly my team, but yes, we prepared those files for delivery.
Got it, thank you. And did you help prepare the data that went into those files?
Did I help develop those models? Yes.
Okay. And similar questions, did you provide the particle tracking model files for the phase 3 MCWD 167 and MCW 169 to the Callum experts and the AHO?
We did not provide initially we did not provide all of the particle tracking files. And we did not provide, for whatever reason, separate models. They had the models that were used to generate the particle tracks.
But eventually, did you provide the information, the files?
Eventually, the files were provided, yes.
And I'm not going to that issue, we've discussed it. And to be specific, you provided .cbb files, cell by cell flow budget output files, correct?
I believe we provided the .cbb files for, yes, I believe we provided the .cbb files.
For phase 2 and for phase 3, correct? You provided 2 different times.
I believe we provided them 2 different times, yes.
And similarly, you provided the .hds files, the water level output files, correct?
There was some discussion about whether the .hds files were needed. And so I'm not 100% sure if they were included in every submission, but I know that at least some of those included the .hds files.
For phase 2 and phase 3, correct?
I believe so, yes.
My question to you is, when our experts looked at the 2 files, there was different data. Are you aware that the .cbb and HDF files are different from phase 2 and phase 3?
I am aware that the particle tracks, that there was a difference in the files, yes.
Okay, once again, what did you tell that to anybody? Other than my asking this for the first time, that the files were different?
I wasn't aware that the files were different until it was raised by your side.
And why did you change the files? And once again, I mean, as you can see,
we didn't change the files.
Information we're getting and changing. Why did you change the files and not tell anyone until our experts asked?
We didn't change the files. Your experts didn't ask us why we changed the files. That was written into the testimony that the files were, that the model was different, and the model is not different.
But you agree with me, the files from phase 2 and phase 3 are different. Specifically, the .cbb and .hds files are different from phase 2 and phase 3.
I agree that we did, after the testimony, we went back and looked, and we determined that there is a difference, yes.
All right. Can we take a look at MCWD 176 PDF 9, please? That's 176 PDF 9. Oh, there we go. Okay. And the second bullet point, you state in words or substance that the models are underestimate recharge to the dune sand aquifer, correct?
Yes.
The question is, did you use EKI's soil water balance model to conduct the recharge analysis?
We based our recharge assignments in the model on the soil balance modeling that was done by EKI. Yes.
Okay. And in doing so, did you increase the recharge rate for the dune sand aquifer from 4.93 inches per year from EKI's soil moisture balance model to 7 inches a year for the
Yes.
MCD calibrated flow model?
Yes.
That's a big increase. Why?
Well, why? Because recharge is not a quantity that can be measured. So the modeling is basically just a guess. So forward modeling of recharge is subject to quite a bit of uncertainty. And the 7 inches a year that we assigned was within the range that was estimated by EKI's modeling. Personally, I think that the recharge actually needs to be higher, but we chose not to deviate farther than the range that was estimated through EKI's modeling because of this particular conversation that we're likely to have now. But I believe that we're still underestimating recharge in this area. Recharge, like I said, is a guess. What we know is that it's less than rainfall. Given that rainfall here is between 14 and 15 inches per year, I don't think it's unreasonable at all that recharge in a pile of sand would be higher even than 7 inches per year. So I stand by this conclusion that the reason that not only we, and CalAm, but other people that have been trying to model this particular area, I think are consistently underestimating recharge.
So you're saying recharge is a guess, right? Those were your words?
Recharge is a guess, yes.
Speculation, according to you, correct?
It is a educated guess, not speculation.
Okay, when you say the range, but EKI used 4.93, correct?
Objection,
EKI
it's the testimony in the evidence.
I'm sorry, I believe you answered that, but
No, I didn't answer that. I said that EKI determined that the
hold on,
average recharge was
rule on the
4.93,
objection
but it
first.
could. I'm sorry.
Dr. Kincaid, I'm going to help your attorney
Sorry
out.
about that.
Let me.
You can just let him answer. It's fine.
Okay.
It's just
I
he's
think
giving.
that's
It's the same question that was just asked.
Got it. Dr. Kincaid, go ahead. I apologize for. We're here. We're ready for your answer, please.
The use of the word model is a giveaway, right? They modeled recharge. Other people have modeled recharge, and we've come up with that. The royal we, people have come up with estimates that are quite variable, which is very consistent with what I have observed with respect to recharge all across the world, quite frankly. It is not a measurable quantity. You can measure rainfall, but you can't measure recharge. So we come up with all kinds of different methods to estimate what that recharge would be. In this particular case, EKI developed a detailed soil balance model for this particular region for this purpose to try to estimate recharge. 4.93 was the average value of recharge that they determined for the calibration period. It could have been as high as 7 or 6.9 or something like that. So I felt like it was perfectly within my prerogative, my scientific prerogative, to vary it within the range that they determined. And I hold that it's perfectly reasonable to use a different form of modeling. In this case, this modeling to estimate that recharge is likely to be even higher than that, if that's what's required to produce an acceptable or to produce a calibration to the observed heads. So yes, we did deviate from 4.93. 4.93 was not a measure of recharge. It was a model simulation of average recharge during the calibration period, for which the simulation range extended up to about 7, which is why we went to 7 and why we didn't deviate from 7 was because I knew we would be having this conversation right now.
Thank you. I again respectfully move to strike it. My question was very simple about did the EKI soil moisture balance model have 4.93 inches per year as an average? Again, with respect, Ms. Coonsey, you went on to talk about decisions, I'm not sure what he talked about, but it wasn't responsive to my question. I would move to strike and ask him again to be admonished just to answer my question. I'm almost done.
Mr. Betts, motion to strike is denied. I think this conversation is in fact helpful to me. I realize it was not directly responsive to your question, so we will repose your question, Dr. Kincaid. I could try it. Mr. Betts, you should repose the question because you're going to get the attribution rights. Please.
Thank you. Would you agree EKI's soil moisture balance model had an average of 4.93 inches per year?
Yes.
All right. And would you also agree that the Monterey Subbasin groundwater flow model uses 2.52 inches per year?
I'm not sure about that. I know it uses a lower recharge value,
Lower than what? Lower than EKI's?
lower than the 4.93. Yes.
Those are the questions I have for right now, subject to further cross on redirect. I do have a comment though.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. You may comment as long as it's not testifying.
No,
Please.
I hope it not to be. I do make a motion to strike. I think all of Dr. Kincaid's phase 3 written and oral testimony. I think there are a number of errors that were discussed today. There's a number of admitted speculation, testimony based on admitted speculation. I think there are several areas where the rules were not followed, whether it be inconsistent files, not using agreed upon terms. There's undisclosed data, and I don't think he answered a variety of my questions, but that's not a separate ground to strike. But I do think it's wholly unreliable as for the reasons I did articulate, errors, speculation, and not following the rules. And I would strike any and all of his testimony for phase 3, and I move accordingly.
Mr. Betts, would you request to submit this motion in writing? And the reason for that would be so that you can actually cite to the specifics where you think there are errors or inconsistencies.
Yes, I think that would be appropriate.
I think that would be, and what I'd like to do this quickly. I had tentatively set an October 4th deadline for responses to the other outstanding evidentiary motion. I mean, I guess, would you be able to get a written submission in by Thursday, the 28th? I realize that's a quick turnaround.
That would be, may I caucus with our team during lunch and then come back and propose what we propose?
Propose some deadlines.
Yeah.
I think it would be a good idea to line up if we can, what I'd like to do is set up an evidentiary deadline for the written motion and any others that may come up because of the remainder of today, and then set a consistent deadline for any written response to those.
Understood.
motions.
Thank you.
So I can just let everyone know to think about that. With that, I think, do you have anything else, Mr. Betts, before we move on to the next witness?
No, thank you for asking.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Kincaid, for your testimony today. I think we'll hear from you again, but thank you for being with us for quite some time this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And if we can, to my team, Ms. Mullen or the team, if we can unpin us for a moment so I can see the room better. There's probably a way for me to do that on my own, but I don't know what it is. Thank you. I think with that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and move on, since I think we're going to have a different witness and a different attorney cross-examining on deck. And I'd like to at least get a good start with Ms. Nelson before we break for lunch. Is there any concern about that proposal that we go ahead and push forward?
I just get 5 minutes.
Absolutely. That seems fair since you're still on deck. Let's take a 5-minute break. We will return at 11:28 and we'll intend to pick up with Ms. Nelson when we return. Thank you. All right, we're back. It is 11:29. Mr. Moore, I understand you'll be handling the cross-examination of Ms. Nelson. Is that right?
I will be, yes.
Wonderful. I'm first, I'll just to orient ourselves, Ms. Nelson. Do you recall, if you would please come off mute, do you recall taking the oath when you testified earlier in this proceeding about a week and a half ago?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, I will hand things over to you to begin your cross-examination.
Thank you. Ms. Nelson, good morning.
Good
It's almost
morning.
getting close to this afternoon. We have met before, correct?
Yes,
In fact, there was a time way back that I took your deposition. Do you recall that?
yes.
All right. And I think I asked you this question, but I asked you, you're not a modeler, are you?
I have done quite a bit of modeling in my career, but I currently do not press the buttons anymore. I have a great staff that does that for me.
Well, last time I asked you, you said you were no longer a modeler. So it sounded like it was more than just having somebody else, push the buttons.
I don't know why you felt that way, but I mean, I've done a significant amount of groundwater modeling in my career. I have 2 years of research at Stanford actually developing solute transport models. And I've used models throughout my career. But as I said, I no longer push the buttons.
Okay. Well, the only reason I said it, because that's what you said to me at the time. I didn't know one way or another, so I'll find it. We can probably forget it. Tell me, what is your specialty and what are you doing as an expert in this case?
I would say that my primary purpose has been I have a lot of knowledge about the Monterey Subbasin. I have worked on the Monterey Subbasin on behalf of MCWD for many years. I am one of the primary authors of the Monterey Subbasin GSP. I'm also one of the primary reviewers of the 180 400-foot aquifer groundwater sustainability plan. I have significant knowledge about the conditions in those basins, the data that has been collected over the years in those basins. And as such, I've helped Dr. Kincaid in the development of the models and the basis of both the hydrostratigraphy as well as chemical composition and understanding of the conceptual conditions in the Monterey Subbasin. I've also participated in the transport modeling. I have 30 years of experience in contaminant transport. That's in addition to doing work in sort of the clean world in water industry. I have for years worked on contaminant and solute transport as part of basically releases of contamination, similar to what has happened, in places like Fort Ord. And have, so in addition to my work sort of in the clean, supplying clean water to and evaluating water supplies for water districts, I also have done a huge amount of work in the contaminant industry.
You said, I think, at the beginning of that, you've worked for a long time for MCWD. Can you tell me how many years have you worked for MCWD?
I think I was first engaged in about 2016 is my recollection.
Okay. And have you been engaged from 2016 on, meaning you've been an employee or an expert or a consultant, the MCWD during that entire period, 2016 to 2023?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Can you just speak up a little bit? I don't know if there's any way I can control it, but I don't think I can.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
It's better, thank you.
Okay, sure. You have been then employed by MCWD from 2016 up to 2023, correct?
Correct. I am a consultant for MCWD.
Did you start off as a consultant?
Yes, I did.
Have you always been a consultant?
I have been retained by MCWD as their consultant.
Throughout
I've
that entire,
also-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've also been retained as an expert for this matter by the law firm that Mr. Brochard works for.
Tell me, what's the difference between hired by the law firm and hired by MCWD in your mind?
I've been hired very specifically for these proceedings by Mr. Brochard's law firm to evaluate specific questions posed by the State Water Board and the court.
So you're now, was there any specific area of this case that you were hired for?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I'm sorry, I'm not, my sound is not very good. Is there any specific area or specific matter within this case that you were hired for?
I was hired as an expert to opine on the questions posed by the court and by the State Water Board.
And you were hired because of your long-term acknowledgement or knowledge of the basin? Is that why you were hired for this project?
I believe that my knowledge of the basin is very helpful in being able to opine on the issues that have been, asked by the court.
Okay, tell me something. Why are you involved in this? Let me ask you a different question. That's a bad question. What are you trying to accomplish, and what is Marina Coast trying to accomplish?
I've been asked, as I said, to opine on the specific questions of the court and respond to those to the best of my ability.
That's not my question. My question is, what is your purpose and CalAM's purpose, and what do you intend to perhaps accomplish by this?
Objection, vague.
I would say that I have
Hold on,
been
let me-
asked to opine on questions. Okay,
Hold on.
sorry, my bad.
Just a moment. Sorry, it takes me a moment to think about these objections, which is good if I'm thinking about them. I think it's fair. I'm not sure where you're going, Mr. Moore. So I think the objection that this is vague is fair. I also am wondering here why we're spending this time when we have limited time, when you did have a chance, as I understand, to depose Ms. Nelson. And I wonder if we can accelerate through some of this background. But I will give you a chance to rephrase this question if it's important.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
When you were hired, were you told anything about what the purpose of this case was and what you were trying to accomplish?
Objection, vague as to time and hired by who.
I'll make it right. I'll modify that. Hired by MCWD. Were you told anything about the intent of this lawsuit and what your role was going to be within the intent of this lawsuit?
Objection, lacks foundation.
I wasn't hired by MCWD for this
There's an
purpose.
outstanding objection. Let's see. I'm going to overrule that objection. I think this is a fair question, and Ms. Nelson, you can give caveats and specifics as you understood the question. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I specified that I was not retained by MCWD for my work associated with these proceedings. I was hired by Mr. Brochard's law firm.
Same question. What were you told about the purpose of this lawsuit and your role within that purpose?
I was retained to respond to the questions posed by the court.
A little bit different than my question. My question is, what were you told? Somebody said something, you were hiring you for this reason. What was the reason why you were being hired? Not what you think, but what were you told?
I was hired to respond specifically to the questions of the court, which related to whether or not the slant wells that were being proposed by CalAM There were very specific questions that were posed by the court. I can go back, I'd have to go back and I can reiterate what those were and respond to that. I mean, that was what I was hired to do.
I understand what you were hired to do. What did they tell you? The question is not what you think happened, what was in their mind, why they did it. What were you told? The purpose of your testimony.
I was told that I was supposed to answer the questions of the court. I don't know how else to answer that.
Well, I think you answered it this time, not before, but this time. The last time we were together, I think I asked you a few questions that Michael Betts asked before about your knowledge of the mitigation and monitoring provision in the the water board decision. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do recall there was discussion about the mitigation monitoring plan during the last time we spoke, but it has been a while.
Yeah. And you told me at the time you hadn't seen it, right?
I can't recall if I said I hadn't seen it or if I hadn't seen portions of it. I don't recall.
Mr. Moore, can we just pause for a moment so I can orient myself? We're talking about the mitigation and monitoring program. You said the state water board, decision, but I don't think you mean that. You mean the, is it the PUC?
No, not the
Or
PUC.
Coastal Commission?
Coastal Commission, I'm sorry, Coastal
Coastal
Commission.
Commission? Okay, thank you.
And if you recall, I had a copy and I handed it to you. I asked you, had you seen it? And you said you hadn't seen it. I asked you then, when did you ask for it? You said you didn't ask for it.
Can you show me the document we're discussing? I'm sorry. It's been a long time since we've spoken.
Sure. Well, let me just ask you this before I will get the document. Have you looked at it? Do you know what's in it?
Do I know what's in what? Sorry.
What I just said.
She just needs to see it so she knows what you're talking about.
Mr. Moore, if we can pull up the documents that we actually know
Yeah, could we?
to ensure that we're all talking about at least the front page.
I believe it's exhibit 125.
MCWD 125, I think we
I believe
decided.
it is.
Yes. And we can just start by going to the front page and we can go from there.
Do you recall that I gave you a copy of this document?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think you gave me a copy of the staff report,
I did
which I
that
don't
too.
think this is.
No, it's not. Did you see at the time a mitigation and monitoring part of the staff report?
I'm sorry, if you could pull up the document we're talking about, I think it would really help me.
Would it?
Now I'm confused. I thought this was the document Mr. Moore was talking about.
He's now talking about something different.
Okay.
I believe it's CalAm 118 is the staff report from the Coastal Commission, whereas this exhibit is the final adopted order. So this one came after the staff report.
All right. Thank you. And that was CalAm 118.
I believe so, yes.
That's the final report. To the extent we have a final report.
Well, this is the one on the screen is the final.
Right. And the one before is 114, did you say? I'm sorry.
I said 118.
118. So, okay, would you put up 118, please?
I think this is it. This is CalAm 118, which says staff report.
Oh, it does. Okay. So I showed you this report. You recall?
Yes, I do recall now. We had a discussion about it.
So tell me what, one thing I asked you at the time, why haven't you reviewed this? And what did you tell me?
My recollection is that I had been very busy associated with the testimony and preparation of all of the work associated with this, with the trial, or I should say in front of the state board, that I had not reviewed this in its entirety. I think later we had a discussion about the fact that my Tina Wang from my office had in fact provided comments on this, and she had asked me some questions with regard to specific items on that. And so in fact, I had seen for sections of this that she and I had discussed.
So what sections did you read after I gave you a copy of this?
Are you saying after I testified? I mean, what I
Yes.
know is that I talked to Tina Wang, and she prepared a letter that was commenting on the monitoring plan that was in this. She discussed certain aspects of it with me, and I had not realized that that was the document that you were showing me. So I corrected my testimony and said, in fact, after it had been, I realized, oh yeah, I had seen certain paragraphs of this document and had discussed it with Tina, and she had prepared a response, submitted a letter to which my name was also included, because she and I had talked about it.
What is your understanding of what is in this document? Is there a mitigation and monitoring provision in this document?
My understanding is that there are provisions in here that identify the types of things that would need to be included within a mitigation monitoring plan, but it does not actually include a mitigation and monitoring plan.
You mean it doesn't include a final mitigation and monitoring plan, right?
It doesn't include specifics. In other words, to the extent that when I think of a monitoring plan, I am thinking about something which says, look, you're going to put in 5 wells, here are where they're going to be. You're going to monitor them for, this in this period of time. You will evaluate concentrations. You'll get very specific criteria upon which it is based. That is what a monitoring plan includes, in my opinion. I would say that this document includes the type of provisions that the monitoring plan should include, but it does not include the actual specifics of a monitoring plan, like the well locations, concentrations, et cetera, which is what I would conclude would be a monitoring plan.
Well, that didn't stop you from reading it, did it?
As I said, at the time you and I discussed it, I had spoken very specifically about certain aspects of this with Tina Wang, who was working on writing a comment letter back to with regard to this plan.
My question again is, did you read it?
I have read it since. It's been a while. I think it was back in November. But yes, I have read it since. I don't recall all the provisions.
And you decided on your own that this was not something that you considered a monitoring plan, right? Because it doesn't have the location of the wells. Is that your testimony?
Yes,
Objection,
my
Ms.
recollection of having read this plan, this document, is that it does not have specific well locations, nor does it have specific criteria or the types of details that I would need to evaluate whether or not a monitoring plan was sufficient.
Why would it need well locations? You had well locations already. Are you saying add more well locations to make this a viable mitigation and monitoring plan?
Objections made.
Absolutely. I would envision that any good monitoring plan would include the installation of numerous monitoring wells along the coast and in other locations to verify that the project is not causing a problem.
Well, you were at that time working on a plan, at least an objection to CalAmp, because you claimed that CalAmp's plan was going to cause damage to the wells, damage to intrusion, a number of different things that are all part of this plan. Now, wouldn't you have been curious as to what was in this document and try to analyze a little bit before you continue with the position that CalAmp is making all these mistakes and causing all this harm?
I'm going to object. There was a lot of Mr. Moore testifying in there about who's making what accusations and what's in what document.
I'm going to sustain that objection. And Mr. Moore, I think you've made your point about the plan, and I think I understand your point, and I'm wonder if it's an appropriate time to move on. I mean, if you have one more question related to this, or we can move to the next item. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask you this, not about this document anyway, but about this whole plan. Did you discuss with your team about researching a monitoring and mitigation plan to see if any of these plans that were out there, and there's all, the PUC was also there. By the way, you didn't see the PUC plan either, right?
I think we discussed this. I think that I have seen to some extent. I've definitely skimmed it since you and I talked. I am aware of it.
So did you, when you saw the PUC plan, did you conclude at that time that it wasn't worth really even considering it or putting it in a position where it'd be part of your thought process? I mean, you're trying to, let me go ahead and answer that question. I'm asking questions.
I guess I'm not sure what the question, can you be more specific about what the question is, please?
The question is, well, let me ask you this. Was it your role, do you think, at the time, to do what you could to fix a problem? And that problem was providing water to the basin. Is that your job, or is it just to make money?
Objection again. I don't know that Ms. Nelson has ever testified that her job is to provide water to the basin. And to the extent we're going to ask what Ms. Nelson discussed with her team or even with Marina Coast outside of this specific proceeding, I think we're going to get into other issues that could involve privilege.
Mr. Moore, I'm going to sustain the objection. My other concern here was you used the phrase "at the time." I'm not sure what time we're talking about. I'm also not quite sure that this line of cross-examination is specific to phase 3. But if you want to attempt that question again in a more specific way,
Yeah, I can.
try.
Well, let me ask you this. Your job was to provide information to your client, the lawyers, and your other client, MCWD, correct?
Objection again.
And Mr. Burchard, your objection is to the scope of that.
Yes, the scope of the question, vague as the time period, whether she has different jobs for different clients.
I can clean all that up.
Right.
Am I correct when I ask you this question that you were working for the law firm, correct?
I was retained by Mr. Burchard's law firm with regard to this matter to answer the court's questions and testify before the state board.
Okay, I got it. So it is a law firm you were working for. And so when you are working for the law firm, was it your view that you were trying to stop this project, or were you trying to get this project through to help with the water supply in the valley?
I was tasked with answering the court's questions on the potential impacts of the slant wells, which is the scope of my testimony and all of the work that I've produced in relation to these proceedings. I think you're very aware of the opinions that I have put forward with regard to the project and its potential impacts on the Monterey subbasin. Those were in specific response to questions posed by the court and the state board.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess my question is a little bit different in that when you were doing your work, was it for, in some sense, it's all for the, I guess, the law firm, the law firm's client, right? That's what you were doing. Is that correct?
A
Right,
vague
that's a question.
objection, vague. I don't know what he's asking.
Well, it's only important that she knows what I'm asking.
Mr. Moore, I think I'm going to shut down this line of questioning. I understand perfectly Ms. Nelson was hired by a law firm and she's doing work for this proceeding. I'm not sure what you're getting at here. I don't think it's relevant to what the questions that the State Water Board is being tasked to write a report for the court. So I would ask you to move along to the next line of questioning, if you would, please.
Well, if I could have one more question.
Okay.
All right. Well, maybe we'll come back to it in a few minutes because I want to think through it a little bit, and thank you for the time. When you were putting all these, your opinions on the different reports you're writing, you wanted to get it right, didn't you?
I very much try and opine on what I believe is correct. Yes.
And so when you provided reports and other things in this matter, wouldn't it have been good to go back and look at the mitigation monitoring contracts from the PUC and otherwise?
Objection, it's not a contract. And as we've already established, well, I hope we've established there's no evidence that the PUC has adopted a mitigation monitoring plan.
Can we make
So,
Mr. Moore?
That is not correct, but we'll save the conversation for later.
Let's save the conversation. Let's also, I think if you want to ask this question, Mr. Moore, the best way to do it would be to reference the specific exhibits you're talking about, because there are a number of documents out there which has been confusing to everyone, I think. And I know you may need time. If you need time to come up with the exact numbers, maybe we get back to this question after lunch.
That's fine. Thank you. Do you recall arguing that water flows outward and into the ocean, whereas Cal-Am stated that you said that stated water flows inland? Is that a correct statement?
And I don't understand the statement. No, sorry.
Let me try it again. The statement was MCWD argued that the water flows outward, and into the ocean, whereas Cal-Am stated water flows inland. Now it seems like both of the models show that the water flows inland, as Cal-Am originally stated in phase 1. Is that a true statement?
I'm gonna object as to vague because the initial statement, if he has an exhibit or something that we could look at so that we know exactly what he's talking about. It's a large area. There's a lot of water. It moves different places in different areas.
And I also was confused with the question, Mr. Moore, which is I'm not answering it, but when you said water, whether you meant both seawater and groundwater, it's possible to be more specific.
is a hydraulic gradient without project pumping across the CMEX property in the coastal dune sand aquifer, seaward or landward?
The heads in the CMEX wells are all above sea level. And therefore, the gradient is toward the ocean. In the dune sand aquifer.
Okay. Let me ask you another question, one that we addressed with Johnson Gay earlier. And that was MC Day, excuse me. Your lawyers crossed Johnson extensively on a topic that he admitted that one, he used well data concentrations. And two,
Can you speak up?
seawater
I'm really having a hard time hearing. I'm really sorry. I don't want you to have to repeat it.
Huh? I was. Is everybody else having the same problem?
It's
when
there
you
is
look, when you look down to read, it becomes more difficult to hear you.
Perhaps at the lunch, we can get Mr. Moore's microphone adjusted, which perhaps is a good time to break now then to attempt that.
great. If you just do your best, Mr. Moore, and you're speaking at a normal rate, but maybe if somewhat more slowly, it might be helpful.
Sure. I've
Thank
been
you.
accused of that before.
And be sure to lean towards the microphone when you do speak, if you would, please.
Sure. Is there a lunch break? I'm sorry. Maybe I missed that.
One option would be to take a lunch break. What time is it now? I'm in my,
It's noon.
thank you. Mr. Moore, if this would be a good time to break, we could break for lunch for an hour. And then that would give you the opportunity to do a couple of things, but one of them might be to swap out the microphone or get it to work. Looking to the room, does anyone have any objection to going ahead and taking our a 1 hour lunch break at this time? All right, great. It is 12:01. Let's return at 1:01 p.m. and we will pick up with the cross-examination of Ms. Nelson. Thank you very much.